Well, let's drill down now on the pipeline purchase report with the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming to speak with me about another report issued by your office down. The federal government paid $4.4 billion for the Trans Mountain pipeline. In your view, was that the best price they could have obtained?
It's difficult to assess for sure without having been in the negotiating room with Kinder Morgan, but based on our evaluation of what the pipeline and the expansion project are worth, it's at the high end of what's an acceptable range. We estimate the range is between $3.6 billion and $4.6 billion for both the existing pipeline as well as the expansion project. So it's at the high end of the range.
And we have to understand the context of the negotiation, right? At the time, there appeared to be only one suitor for this pipeline after Kinder Morgan said, we're very fast becoming not interested in carrying through this project. So there's only the federal government lined up to buy it. It doesn't sound like it was much of a bargaining process.
Yes, it doesn't seem to have been a bidder's war on this asset. And the information I have is indeed there was only one willing buyer, and that was the federal government.
Which would seem to argue for,
a lower price.
Yeah, for holding firm for something that's less than the sticker price.
Yes, when you have a company that's willing to get rid of something and a willing buyer, but only one buyer, it usually speaks for lower price than what you'd expect.
Now we heard the finance minister take issue with your numbers. Say no, it's not 4.4, it's 4.1 is what the government actually paid. When you think about the tax advantages, how he put it, what is that a valid argument? What's he talking about?
Well, he's talking about the capital gains tax. My understanding is that what he's talking about, the capital gains tax that Kinder Morgan will have to pay as a result of having made a profit when selling this wonderful asset to the federal government. So that says two things. First, that Kinder Morgan made a profit by selling the asset, which is not a bad thing in and of itself. But it also says that had somebody else bought the pipeline, Kinder Morgan would still be liable to pay tax. So to say that the price that the government paid is 4.1 when you take into account the tax that they'll have to pay is a bit of a false argument. The government paid 4.4. Kinder Morgan will have to pay taxes on the capital gains it made. Had it sold it to somebody else, teachers, for example, or the CPPIB or whoever else has the means to buy a pipeline, Kinder Morgan would still be liable to income capital gains tax. What would the government say in these circumstances? That they made money on something they didn't buy? Well, that's the nature of government. They tax us.
Okay. Let's again drill down a little further into what this was all about. So it's your assessment that they may have been able to negotiate a lower price, looking at the range that you set out of the valuation of that pipeline. And let's be clear, your valuation of between 3.6 and 4.6, that's based on the pipeline getting built as planned by 2021.
Exactly.
And we're seeing delays already. What if continued delays push that project beyond the date? Then what?
Well, our assessment, as you pointed out, assumes that it goes according to the plan laid out by Kinder Morgan at the time of selling this to the government. And that assumed that the expansion project would be finished by the end of 2021. So oil would flow in the expanded Trans Mountain at the very end of 2021.
And we know it's already not going according to plan.
It's unlikely to be by that date, given that was back in May and nothing has happened, or not very much has happened construction-wise on the expansion project. So we ran some simulations to see what would happen to the value of the purchase if the in-service date was postponed by a year, for example. And we calculate that it's a loss to the government or to the owner of the pipeline of $700 million for 1 year delay in construction. So if the government is still the owner of the pipeline and it is completed, the expansion project is completed 1 year later, the value of the holding will be lower by $700 million. And that's because of the foregone revenues.
Right. But then you also added, if the delay, you had the likelihood of increased construction costs, I think, as well, which adds another $400 million, I think,
exactly,
to the price.
And
so you're up at $1 billion.
We also looked at that. If there are increases in the construction costs, which Kinder Morgan in May 2018 estimated to be around $9.3 billion, we said, what if there's an increase or a decrease. We were optimistic. We looked at both scenarios, increase or decrease in the construction price for the Trans Mountain pipeline. And it reduces the value of the whole asset by $450 million, if I'm not mistaken.
So what's there is the argument that says, look, and you know, it's not, and I don't even want to suggest that this is the way to frame your report, but it's not all, you know, questionable or negative news. There's the suggestion in here that, you know, there can be benefit to the economy if this thing gets built. You know, less and less, we understand, the longer it takes, but there can be benefit to the economy if it gets built both by way of jobs and by way of higher oil prices, the ability to get oil to market. Tell me about that. And
that's probably the main reason that drove the government to buy that asset. The construction jobs related to the expansion of the pipeline, yes. A boost to the GDP by 0.1%, modest, but for the local and regional economy, probably important. 7,900 jobs, again, important for the region, but the main benefits of having the expansion project go ahead and be finished on time or as soon as possible is the capacity to have to open up new markets for Alberta oil. Right now, transportation capacity is constrained, so Alberta oil, being where it is, landlocked, cannot get to markets as easily as producers would like. So increasing pipeline capacity will make it easier for oil producers to get a better price for their oil. Right now, the Western Canada Select sells at a discount compared to the WTI. So if there's increased pipeline capacity, it's not unthinkable, quite likely in fact, that the discount will narrow to the advantage of Canadian oil producers who will be able to get a better price for what they produce.
You also looked at, well, let me ask you, what happens if there is no pipeline expansion? What if it does not go ahead? And there's lots of ifs around this project. What's the value then?
Well, if there's no expansion, the government will have paid $4.4 billion for the old existing Trans Mountain pipeline, which was built in 1953. So quite old, probably rusty in some places, and we estimate that the pipeline, the existing pipeline as it stands, has a value of between 1.8 and 2.8 billion. The government has paid 4.4 for that and the expansion project. So if the expansion never happens, the government will have paid 4.4 billion for something that's worth anywhere between 2 and 2.8 billion. So a big loss for the federal treasury. And that's the worst case scenario.
Yves Giroux, always good to get see your reports and get a chance to follow up with you about them. Thanks again for your time today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.